my name is Kelly Crawford, and today I'm going to tell you the story of how an anime about young people blowing each other up in space eventually led me to travel the world and ultimately become a second grade teacher. So, let's begin. So the anime in question is called Gundam Wing. Now, if my mom is watching, I apologize because this show still makes her rage and roll her eyes over how utterly obsessed with it I became. So, the Gundam franchise started in the 70s in Japan, and for those less familiar with the genre, it is usually militaristic, and the key feature is that it uses giant mechanized robots for the soldiers. Now, it's been very, very popular in Japan since the 70s. There are many different iterations. However, it had never come to the US in great popularity until the year 2000, when Cartoon Network picked up Gundam Wing to air on its after-school special programming called Toonami. Now, I, of course, being an elementary student at the time, often watched this afternoon programming. I loved things like Dragon Ball Z and all the other fun shows that they had. However, when I saw Gundam Wing, I was hooked from the very first episode. I was obsessed. I had to watch it every day. It was something I never really connected with before. Now, Gundam Wing had 49 episodes, and including some, post-series movies. I loved this show so much that I sat down and recorded every single one on our television's VHS, which, yes, I do still have. However, I don't have a VHS player anymore, sadly. I became so obsessed with this show that I bought the cheapo little models at Toys R Us that broke immediately. I named my bike after one of the robots' names. I knew the characters' birthdays. I tried to find the Japanese versions of the show, even though I couldn't understand it. I was completely and utterly obsessed. I watched every episode, and I watched those VHSs so much they have almost completely worn down. Now, this show is really about a bunch of kids who live in space. This is future after colony time, and there are some military groups that are essentially oppressing the citizens. So they are essentially freedom fighters who are sent with their giant mechanized robots to go down to Earth and to take out these oppressive military groups. Now, I don't know what really connected 10-year-old me with this. However, watching the characters, I knew I wanted to learn how to kill people like they did on the show. Now, don't worry, I am very well adjusted now. However, at the time, I really, really wanted to learn how to kill people like they did in the show. So, I don't think that's the reason I told my parents, but I asked them if I could join a martial arts group. So, luckily, there was one right up the street from where I lived, and so my parents signed my brother and I up for a 6-week trial, just to test it out. My brother lasted probably 2 weeks, and I have been there since, so about 20 years now. I had signed up in September of that year after spending a whole summer doing nothing but watching Gundam Wing over and over and over, learning how to code so I could make my computer mouse a little character, things like that. Now, the next year, in 2001, of course, 9/11 happened. I was a 7th grader, very confused, had no idea what was happening, feeling pretty terrified and understandably confused, lost, did not know what to do. However, the show, with a lot of its themes of oppression, military interventions, pacifism, resistance, death, and ultimately the hope, gave me a lot to at least try to put it in perspective. Of course, it's not the same, and I do not have a giant mechanized robot, but for 7th grade me, it really helped put things into perspective. It also taught me a lot about the importance of resisting. So I started joining anti-war rallies, learning as much as I could, and doing a lot of the things that I had seen kids in this anime able to do. And as we all know, the power of young people is something that continues to this day. They are always the leaders, and they have way more power than we often give them credit for. And of course, I see that every day with my students. A little bit after that, I started high school, and I started studying Japanese. Of course, I wanted to read the manga, the original manga for Gundam Wing in Japanese. I wanted to listen to the original versions, so of course I had to learn Japanese. I was becoming very involved in karate, and I started teaching it. So I was teaching a kids class, and I had the opportunity in 2004 to go to Japan and train. That was my first international experience, and from there I met tons of people from around the world that I am still friends with today. Since then, I have gone to a dozen or so countries for karate, and I've met people from a dozen more. I've learned snippets of languages from all over the world, including many countries where our governments don't get along. And from that, of course, we see a lot of those same themes that I had in Gundam Wing, where people come together and it doesn't matter what your alliances are and where you're from. What matters is the people. And after that, I had considered becoming a Japanese interpreter in college, but ultimately it didn't really fit with me. So I thought about what were the things I really, really enjoyed doing. And of course, teaching karate was one of my top things. So I joined the education department at Eastern, and now I have been teaching for quite a few years. I have got my master's in teaching, and I teach 2nd grade here in Spokane. And all of that is because I started watching a silly little after-school Toonami special called Gundam Wing, and let my first big obsession guide many life choices. And of course, during this quarantine time, I've even picked up some models to keep myself occupied. And so that is the story of how a little kid's obsession into a show about fighting robots and blowing things up in space led me to travel the world and ultimately teach little kids in 2nd grade. Thank you for listening.